Right, question number 16. We've got a bounds calculation question. So we have got to the nearest millimetre, a diameter given to us, and its thickness, this coin. So to get your marks on a bounds calculation question, the first thing I'd like you to do is to write down the lower bound and upper bound for each of the measurements given. So 28 millimetres to the nearest millimetre, the lower bound would be 27.5 millimetres and the upper bound would be 28.5 millimetres. And I'd like you to repeat the process for 3 millimetres. Now that's also still rounded to the nearest millimetre, so that would be 2.5 millimetres at its lower bound and 3.5 millimetres for its upper bound. And you've already picked up the first mark. Okay, so we are asked for the maximum possible volume. Volume of a cylinder is the area of the circular top times by the height. The area of the circular top is pi r squared, and the height, and let's plug some numbers in. So pi times radius squared. Now because we want to multiply our radius by itself and then multiply that by the height and by pi, because we're multiplying, the way we're going to get the biggest possible outcome is by multiplying the big numbers together. So I'm going to use my biggest possible radius and my biggest possible height. So there's one other thing to think about though, because you're given the diameter, not the radius, but we know that the radius is half the diameter. Okay, so if we half our biggest possible diameter and use that as our radius, 14.25. Okay, so that's my biggest possible radius that I'm going to use. So I'm going to plug that in there. That's squared. And then I'm going to times it by the biggest possible height, which is 3.5. If I type all of that into my calculator, I get my answer for volume of 2,233, and they've already given me my units of millimetres cubed. So with bounds calculations, please remember to show the lower bound and upper bound for each of the dimensions given to you in the question, or each of the values if it's not to do with shape, and then think about what they're asking you. In this case, they're asking you for the biggest possible volume. So because it's a multiplication, I've chosen to use my biggest numbers, my upper bounds for each. But when we're dividing, for instance, it gets a bit trickier. You may want to go and have a look at some more bound calculation questions with other calculations in, so like division, like I've said. Haven't seen it yet, so it could come up on the paper 3 for maths for higher.